The fire hose of news from America can feel like a lot these days.
If you're trying to figure out what to make of it all, we got you.
I'm Katie Simpson.
And I'm Paul Hunter. We're correspondents here in Washington,
working just around the corner from where much of the action is taking place.
2 blocks from the White House.
And that's the name of our new podcast.
For top-notch analysis of U.S. politics from a Canadian perspective, find 2 blocks from the White House every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts.
Including YouTube.
You know that wellness goal you set at the start of the year? It's not too late to stick with it and make your future self proud. Especially with the all-in-one nutrition shake from Kachava. With 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. No fillers, no nonsense, just the highest quality ingredients. Stick with your wellness goals. Go to Kachava.com and use code NEWS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code NEWS.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Hi, everyone. It's Sadaf. After the most recent and final Epstein files drop, Sarah and I joined the Reheat sister show, The Big Story, as guests to discuss what they revealed and why it matters. We wanted to share that conversation here as a bonus episode for all of our lovely Reheat listeners. And for a deeper dive, don't forget to listen to our episode on the life and crimes of Epstein from earlier this week. Enjoy!
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
From power brokers in the White House to Wall Street, a who's who of powerful men have had their names crop up in the Justice Department's latest release of its investigative files on Jeffrey Epstein. All have denied having anything to do with his alleged sexual abuse of young women, and being named or pictured in the files is not on its own proof of wrongdoing. But the new batch of some 3 million pages has also revealed Epstein's global reach, raising more questions than answers about his ongoing evasion of justice. I'm Caryn Ceolin, and today on The Big Story, I'm joined by Sarah Sahagian and Sadaf Hassan, journalists and hosts of the Reheat podcast, to discuss why the disclosures have not lifted the veil. Sarah and Sadaf, what a treat to have you both with us today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
So I understand this is a trove of about 3 million files, and I don't presume you've studied them, but I suppose based on what experts are telling us what's in there and know what to look for, what have been the takeaways for each of you so far?
You're right. It's 3 million documents. It's too much for a single human being to come through. It requires a lot of literacy about the legal system and also media literacy. There's so many stories circulating now, and so many names are coming up. And some of them are coming up because they're implicated in Jeffrey Epstein's horrific crimes. And some of them are coming up just because Jeffrey Epstein sent emails referencing them. Like Jon Stewart is one notable case where they just were talking about how Woody Allen, who was an associate of theirs, that's not super surprising, should do a comeback, and he should do a biography of his life narrated by Jon Stewart. So Jon Stewart never went to Epstein's Island. So I think it's really important for everyone, as we are sifting through these documents, to take the time to explore the context in which people are mentioned. For sure, there's a ton of rich white men who are implicated. A lot of your favorites are problematic, and some people who are not your favorites are also problematic. But we do need to take the time to sift through it. And that's a real chore. What are your impressions, Sadaf?
So much of the same. I mean, it's a lot. It's absolutely a lot. And I think what's scary is that so much of it is catching fire on social media right now. And it's easy to pick up on a lot of fake things and misinformation and run with it. And I think a lot of people have, and to not know what is actually true, what we can actually believe. And that makes it really tricky, especially because, as you said, there's so many names in there. And one of the surprising things for me was that there's a lot of politicians' names that come through in there, and quite a few times. And I'm talking from all over the world. And so it's important to get your bearings. It's important to get your research done and actually sit down carefully, read this through, and maybe talk it over. Don't just run with whatever you see in a headline or a tweet. God forbid.
Yeah, I think that's certainly what struck a lot of people, and me being one of them, is that throughout these document dumps, there really hasn't been a whole lot of context around the emails and the pictures that have been produced. And a lot of it, too, has been released before. And I wonder if, whoever's comfortable answering this, I wonder if you think this might be the Trump administration's attempt to maybe dump a few million pages, then wash their hands of it, because we know that they have been consistently scrutinized for how they've handled this case. What's your take on that?
I mean, I can say it does feel like that. We know that there's well double that amount out there. They've said that there's maybe up to 6 million documents. And so this is really only half. So as overwhelming as this is, there's so much more. And it's hard to believe that it's not a little bit of a distraction tactic to get us to get so overwhelmed and get so buried in all of this to not actually know what else might be there, what else might actually need our eyes more than anything else. There's so many redactions. There's, as Sarah mentioned, so many names that are mentioned that aren't actually involved in any crime. And so as you go through these, as you sift through this, and I don't even know that that's possible, really, it's hard to be able to distinguish with what we should actually be focusing on. I think there's a lot left that we're not seeing, and that would be really important to look at, mainly when it comes to actual accountability, right? Sarah, what do you make of it?
Absolutely. I think one thing that we also should mention is that the redaction system didn't work very well. And so a lot of the victims have been exposed. So that's a really unfortunate thing that has happened, and they have suffered enough. There's a lot of salacious details that have emerged, and you're right. I think that maybe they are front loading this, releasing so much information that no one will bother sifting through all of it, and then the news cycle will continue. And that is my real fear, that a scandal that should be bigger than Watergate, really, will just kind of be a flash in the pan, because this is kind of what Donald Trump, his administration, does. They just sort of move on and create new crises to distract you from the last crisis. Also, a lot of his supporters won't bother reading anything that these documents say about him, because he has assured them that these documents absolve him, right? And they do not. For the record, they do not. There are lots of tips that implicate him in abusing young girls. He is not absolved, but he's telling people he is. And a lot of his followers just trust him pretty blindly. So I don't think this is going to lead to lasting change. I think this is another symptom, in my opinion, and my really cynical opinion, of the U.S. becoming more and more fascist, right? The documents mean what I say they mean, because I've said this is what they mean. And a lot of his supporters are just going to follow.
Well, Sadaf, I want to pick up on that point, because a criminal file, can have allegations that were not corroborated. They include false leads. This is pretty standard in really any investigation. So I think it's kind of what makes perhaps even more stunning the dumping of all these raw files in what has been a very complex criminal investigation online for anyone to rummage through, again, without a whole lot of context. I wonder, from your perspective as a journalist, do you think that the production of all this material was a good idea?
As in putting it out and releasing it like this?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. I mean, listen, I'm no fan of censorship. I am a journalist, and I do think that we deserve to know a lot of what's happening and a lot of what has been released. But it is tricky, because I think we don't also have a lot of control over how we're getting it. And I think that makes it really difficult. I also don't really trust the people who are involved with releasing the information. That also makes it tricky. And you can tell, and this is where the media literacy steps in, that I hope a lot of people have going into this, but when there's so much detail on the quote unquote crimes, what may have happened, what may have not, but there's not enough on, for instance, how he was able to get any immunity previously, that's confusing to me. And you can pick up on that. Those are the things we need to know, because those are the things that we can actually take to trial. We can actually assess and investigate. And when that's not happening, I think that's where the concern is, because that's what people should be demanding. We should have an investigation. We need to look into it.
Well, Sarah, let me ask you, because you mentioned earlier several of Epstein's victims have pointed to flawed redactions in the files as having a negative impact on their lives. There's been email addresses, nude photos in which the names and faces of potential victims could have been identified that were included in this release. Do you think there is any other way the DOJ could have handled this release?
Well, I mean, you need to try to redact all personal information. An email address is an easy thing to black out if you're actually going through this properly and you have enough people on your team to make sure that this is done properly. Same thing with photos. You can black out anything that's makes somebody identifiable. So I do think that in our society, we do not put enough care and resources into the rights of victims. And I mean, I know that Canada is a different country. This is a problem here too, where I don't think we always give enough care to victims. And this is really a worldwide problem. So I do hold them accountable. I know it's really difficult to do this. I mean, I don't want to speak from a place of hubris because I understand this is a mammoth project. I get that. But still, the victims, I think, should be at the center of the story. And they really, really aren't. I mean, the things that are making headlines are the things that are the most salacious and the ickiest. Like, for example, Bill Gates trying to get antibiotics and sneak them to his wife without her knowing because he'd given her an STI or he was worried he had. And that is terrible. And I want to say, I do feel awful for Melinda French Gates. That is a horrible thing that happened to her. That is domestic violence. That is abuse. Having said that, there are a lot of people who aren't big names who suffered greatly as children. And I don't think that they are being centered. I don't think that we care enough about them really in this discourse.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, Epstein survivors themselves have said these files haven't done enough to expose every enabler or every abuser. And the release of these documents, I mean, at the end of the day, has not resulted in the arrest of any of the rich and powerful whose names have appeared in these documents. The U.S. Deputy Attorney General, for instance, he said they're not considering any additional charges in relation to the case. Sadaf, what do you make of the fact that no one will be charged?
I think it's maddening, honestly. And I think that's the U.S. administration for you. That's what they've taught us, that they're able to get away with an endless list of crimes. And I think, listen, Trump from the very beginning has just been denying. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, his supporters will just take that and will run with it. But, you know, you name just about any one of these people who's had their names come up quite a few times. The majority of them have denied it intensely. And that seems to be enough for them to get away with it. But there are emails that are there. There's so many documents. And I think when your name is coming up, let's say maybe hundreds of times, you can only deny so much. And so I think once the news is out there, and listen, the internet is forever. These files will always be around. It's impossible for the public to be able to maintain a very true and solid trust that goes deep with this administration at this point. I certainly don't feel that. I think it calls it all into more question than ever.
He was sitting in the driver's seat, and we know that he was shot from outside of his vehicle.
I'm Phil Martino.
And I'm Madison Fitzpatrick. We're back for another season of Tracking a Killer, The Cold Case Files. We are turning up the heat on 8 unsolved homicides, including the decades-old Margaret McWilliams case out of Toronto.
That was normal that she would go out either bicycling, she'd go walking, she'd go jogging. The cause of death was ligature strangulation.
And we're taking a closer look at the 1990 disappearance of University of Toronto student Elizabeth Bain. Her boyfriend was wrongfully convicted of her murder. Now, a class at the University of Guelph Humber is examining police files on the case.
As far as I'm concerned, the more eyes, the better.
Listen to Tracking a Killer, The Cold Case Files on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sarah, I wanted to ask you in particular, because you're our resident royal expert, but new images of the disgraced former Prince Andrew have surfaced in this latest cache of documents. Again, no context for the picture of him, hovering over a female. Palace officials haven't said anything about this latest release. We know he's already been stripped of his royal titles. I suppose, how do you think the royal family is digesting this?
I don't know. I mean, they have, to their credit, already stripped him of his titles. They have tried to take away as many privileges as they could from him. So I do give them credit for that, because there was a time when I really did not believe that would happen. I don't know how they're handling it. I think they're probably having lots of PR meetings to discuss what the statement should be, or if they should make a statement, given that he's no longer part of the family. I think there might be an argument that since they have exiled him, it would make it look like he is still part of the fray, and like they're to an extent endorsing him if they feel the need to respond to this and to speak for him. So I kind of think that maybe they won't say anything, and that actually might be the right course of action, because once you have shunned someone, maybe you should say, it's no longer my responsibility to speak for you. I will see what happens to him. I mean, Keir Starmer would like Prince Andrew to appear before Congress. I feel like the royal family isn't going to comment on that because that's not their place to comment on issues like that. It really isn't. And so maybe they will just leave it up to Keir Starmer to make statements, which I think in this situation, now that Prince Andrew is no longer a prince, is probably the most appropriate way to go.
Do you think that's actually something that could happen, that, former Prince Andrew could testify before a congressional committee?
It will be interesting. And I think I even accidentally called him Prince Andrew when you're right. He's former Prince Andrew or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. I mean, he might. I mean, the Clintons now have said that they will appear before this congressional committee. They previously were resisting. I mean, it is interesting to see who we think will end up there and who won't, because to an extent, while all these people are implicated and they all did likely horrible things, it does seem like it's being chosen very strategically who to scapegoat, right? The Clintons are Democrats, right? And Bill Clinton, I'm not defending him. That man is mentioned many times, right? Not defending him at all. But so was Donald Trump. So it would make sense for him to appear before Congress. It would make sense for lots of his associates to appear before Congress. And so I'm worried that the Republicans are turning this into an opportunity to highlight and spotlight Democrats who are involved, to try to distance themselves from the scandal where their people are very much involved.
Yeah, can we talk about the Clintons here? Just for some background, they've now agreed to those depositions.
Mm-hmm.
They've long resisted them before the House was to vote to hold them in contempt. Some Democrats on the panel were ready to join Republicans in voting to recommend charging them. I mean, this feels like a total surrender from the Clintons.
I think they probably don't want to go to jail. They think at this point, it's not beyond Donald Trump to do whatever and for his people to do whatever they want. So I think that's probably why they've agreed to do it. I think it's to a certain extent, it's self-preservation. They know they don't really have a choice. I mean, what is the alternative? To go hide out in Switzerland? I mean, that literally would be their alternative, to just flee to Switzerland and never set foot back on American soil. So I think they have to. I think obviously Bill Clinton is implicated. However, if you remember his testimony when the Monica Lewinsky scandal happened, I mean, that man is very good at speaking strategically. I don't know if anyone remembers that moment when he said, this depends on what the definition of is. I'm paraphrasing, but he's pretty tricky. So actually, I feel like even though what he's done is probably despicable, it is going to be interesting to see him run circles around the people who are asking him questions, because he's probably evil, but he is also a genius.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't remember the actual clip, but I mean, I've seen it. Obviously, it's a moment for sure. But Sadaf, in many ways, still, this is a victory for the Republicans and for the Republican chairman in particular, when it comes to their efforts to shift the focus away from President Trump's ties to Epstein and his handling of the matter, and then on to prominent Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I completely second everything Sarah said. Those are the names that are popping up more than anyone. And I mentioned this earlier, but again, there's politicians globally who are getting their names brought up, which is really interesting to me, too, that it should be the U.S., again, administration that's being called up again. And it's not really. And he's kind of stuck to the same denials, Trump, that he issued all the way back in the beginning. And that's been sufficing for him. But I think what's alarming is, you've even got the Indian PM, Narendra Modi. He's called in. He comes up so many times in these emails. You've got Norway's crown princess is brought up so many times in the emails. That's unbelievable to me. Sarah Ferguson, too, Andrew's former wife. There's so many people who are are mentioned that I think the goal or the alleged goal has been really effective. We're starting to question all these other relationships with all these other people. And that ends up distracting from what my biggest question is, what was Trump's involvement? Because he seems to have been closest to Epstein more than anyone. He, of course, has said more recently that he did admit to having a friendship with him, but said that it was only for a matter of time. They hadn't been very close in more recent years, but I don't know. It's hard to believe that. And it's interesting because with all these other folks, those don't strike me as friendships. If anything, they're brief interactions. There's something to do with advice, for instance. That's what Modi kept popping up in there for. But Trump was in there, they were buddies, and that's always going to stand out to me in the back of my mind. But yeah, I think it's been a really successful distraction over to these other folks.
But I think, too, again, to the fact that no one will be charged for all of the powerful people who were associated with Epstein, does this mean the danger has now passed, or is it enough that the reverberations of these files have been felt, as you mentioned, Sadaf, so widely?
Yeah, I don't think it's over. And I think that's what's so scary. I think what all of this has unveiled to me, and I know so many people, is that there's a very scary network of people who have been able to operate for a very long time, and they're united over similar interests, if you want to call it that, whatever it might be. And they've been operating for many years, and they still seem to be operating to some degree. Even though Epstein, this head honcho of this operation, isn't there anymore, and neither is Ghislaine Maxwell, his accomplice, there's still a lot of key figures who are still out there, very well alive, and I'm sure who are still involved with this. And when you get so many of these people denying it and refusing to testify and seemingly protecting each other, it's very easy to believe that they've still got each other's backs, in which case, why wouldn't this sort of network continue, in my opinion?
The administration has signaled, however, that no additional major releases are imminent, that this is possibly it. And yet, something that you both have alluded to is that we still don't have any substantial answers for how Epstein sexually abused girls with impunity for decades. Could each of you just reflect on that for a moment, and maybe how do we make sense of that, and where do we go from here?
I think the one thing that everyone should do is try to read Virginia Giuffre's memoir, Nobody's Girl. So she was one of Epstein's victims. She was a victim of Epstein for many years. She was also a victim, allegedly, of former Prince Andrew. She writes very beautifully in her memoir. It's a hard read. It is very upsetting because she suffered for so long. But I think we need to remember that there were people who suffered, there were young girls who suffered, and the rest of their lives were impacted. This is untold trauma. I mean, the idea of going to an island and being victimized by some of the most powerful men in the world, men who have the power to kill you if you try to speak up, that is a level of terror that I think if you haven't experienced it, I don't claim to understand it, because I think if you haven't actually experienced it firsthand, you cannot relate to. So I would just say that it would be, in my opinion, a complete just travesty of justice if no one pursues this. And I think no one will pursue this. I think that's the likeliest outcome. But what we need to do as a society is educate ourselves on the implications for victims, because those are people's daughters. Those are real human beings. Those are people who are suffering. And I think in patriarchy, women's pain often gets glossed over. And we refer to these children, these little girls, as adults, right? I mean, the Republican Party, some of them were young women, but oftentimes they were children as young as 6. So I think it's important to remember the pain. It's important to remember the tragedy. And we can do that ourselves, even if the U.S. Department of Justice does nothing.
Yeah, I completely echo that, sir. Well said. And listen, I think the government is hugely accountable here for a lot of what's happened to these victims. They still haven't taken any. They've said they are not responsible for any of Epstein's victims, which is wild to me. I mean, the question is, who is? And if we don't have him, there's got to be someone. There's got to be a system. And I think that's what these documents just tell me each time I go back to it. And I think what was promised was something. And sure, we've got all these things to sift through till end of times. But I think if you can list all of these abuses, you can give us all of this really painful stuff to go through, a lot of which is probably not true, but you can't tell us what actually happened in terms of protection for the people who are actually involved. If that's not coming through, it shows us who is being protected here, right? And there's countless public figures' names in there, or redacted and shown, but all of the victims are still in there. And I think that shows me that they were the ones who were sacrificed here time and time again. We've talked about that Andrew photo. That woman is laying there. We don't know who that is. And that photo has been shared hundreds of times all over, and it won't be going away. And I just want to know, who was that? Like, how do we protect her? How does she get her accountability? That's my question still.
Sarah, Sadaf, such a pleasure to speak with you both. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. You can send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, reach us on Instagram @frequencypods, or on Blue Sky @thebigstory. If you know someone who might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Caryn Ceolin. Thanks so much for listening.